Welcome to the NABS Now podcast, brought to you by the National Association of Blind Students, a proud division of the National Federation of the Blind.
Welcome to the NABS Now podcast. I'm your co-host and producer, Seyoon Choi. Nina's going to join us very shortly, but I'm really thrilled to present this episode, which is all about diversity and inclusion in partnership with NABS Diversity and Inclusion Committee. People that we often interact with, whether that be at school, at work, and all around us, possess unique backgrounds, identities, a characteristic that makes each one of us different from one another. For this reason, diversity and inclusion, in time and time again, to me has been a very important topic of subject. Race and ethnicity, religious views, sexual orientation, disability status, just to name a few, are a topic of conversation that are important more than ever. For this episode, we'll be joined by the first Vice President of the National Association of Blind Students, Syed Rizby. We'll also hear from the Diversity and Inclusion Community Chair, Rilee Sloan, Co-Chair Johna Wright. Up next, we will have a roundtable discussion with Jessica Karim and Adriana, and at last, I'll return for a quick story time. Without further ado, let's get started. For this segment of the podcast, I am joined by Syed Rizby. How are you, Syed?
I'm doing great, Seyoon. Thank you so much for having me on today.
Absolutely. So why don't you tell us listeners a little bit about yourself and your background?
Sure.
Briefly.
So since we are focusing on diversity on this podcast, I guess I'll focus on the diverse aspects of my background as well. So I was born to Pakistani Muslim immigrants to the United States. I grew up in Western Mass primarily, and I just graduated from my undergrad at the University of Texas at Austin last week, and I'll be starting my law school at Harvard Law School this upcoming fall as class of 2023. And I also graduated from the Louisiana Center for the Blind as well.
Very exciting. So exciting for the law school adventure about to begin. That's gotta be fun.
Yes, definitely. But of course, amongst all this world crisis, it's
Pandemic
pretty
and
uncertain whether we're going to be in person or it's going to be virtual. So let's see what happens.
Yeah, for sure. So a couple questions, and we could kind of have an open chat about this. How has your identity that you possess, or being in an immigrant family, because I totally relate to that, defined how you were viewed when it comes to like your blindness and how that kind of intertwined for you personally in your life?
Sure. Yeah. So I think the Pakistani community, like a lot of communities in the world, can be very disability phobic in many respects, and that disability is generally something you're not supposed to be open about. It's supposed to usually stay pretty quiet about it and not really express to others that you have a disability. So I think that added like a layer of complexity to being disabled with being Pakistani as well. And I think pretty similar sentiments are shared in a lot of other minority groups as well. And then it kind of also added a layer of complexity when dealing with the outside world as well, in that I now no longer just had a funny sounding name or a different looking complexion. I also had a disability on top of that. So it added, like, it made my interactions with others who kind of want people to fit into a certain neat little mold. It added like a few more layers that allowed them not to do so.
Oh, for sure. I forget, were you born here or were you born in Pakistan?
So I was born in the United States, and then my family at the time got a really good opportunity in Ireland. So then I moved with my family when I was very young, so I still don't remember it, to Ireland, and I lived there for a couple of years. And then we moved back to the United States, to Connecticut, and then eventually settled in Western Mass.
Wow, that's a lot of adventure, because just hearing from your experience, I wasn't born in the United States. When that immigration happened, it kind of hit you with the reality that you have possessed a different racial background, but you also have that blindness for sure. How was like going through education? Like, did you face any stereotypical views or religiously or in your family, in particular when you talk about blindness? Because I feel like in my family there was this societally placed low expectations, right? Because they kind of want you to stay quiet, like you were saying earlier. because I felt that a lot back when I was in my home country in South Korea. They have all this infrastructure in place. They have a
Right.
very good public transit system, but they don't really have that resources for you. They don't have Braille. They don't teach you cane
Mhm.
skills and independent living skills.
So it was a kind of a twofold thing. When I started public school, right, it was right after 9/11 or right around the time that 9/11 had happened. So there was a lot of Islamophobia present in the country at the time. And thankfully, my school system was great and they're very supportive of me and my family. But the thing is, you can't really control what kids are learning when they go home and from their parents. In regards to my Islamic background, dealing with trying to access education, it was definitely a lot of harassment growing up, a lot of being called like a terrorist or a towel head, a lot of that. And then on top of that, Massachusetts has a great public school infrastructure, and Long
Absolutely.
Meadow, where I grew up, had a great public school system as well. I definitely really cherished the education and that I got from there. The frank truth is that a lot of places, and I would say probably close to 100% of places, don't know how to properly educate a blind child. And then not only that, I think what it is that since I have some residual vision, most school systems know how to educate a sighted child or a blind child. A sighted child, you give them print; with a blind child, you give them braille and you give them like text to speech.
Hmm. Right. There was kind of that
Right.
no in between
Yeah.
because I
Yeah.
heavily
Yeah.
and relate to that because I also have
Yeah.
a degenerative eye condition that
Yeah.
I started out as having more vision at like 2600 and it would eventually progressively degenerate. And when I came to the US schools, they were read, learn to use a cane. We're
Yeah.
going to get you started with Braille. But I'm also having to psychologically
Yeah. So
tackle
with
those
with me, it
kind
was
of
like, well,
acceptance
you can
process.
see, you just can't see as well as a normal sighted student, but you're not so blind that you should be completely on text to speech. And that was partially on me as well. I'm not going to say it was on
Right.
the school system. That was on me as well, in that it's your natural human instinct, to go along with the sight that you have. And when you're a kid, you don't
You want to use as
necessarily
much sight as
understand
you
the fact
can.
that, like, hey, perhaps I would be much better at working if I just used JAWS and stopped using Zoom text, or learned Braille rather than using large print.
Oh, for sure. I think that's very important. Yeah, that was something I had to get over was, when I came to this country, I had a very limited vision, but eventually it was going to go away. So I had to accept that and just roll with
Hmm.
whatever other, totally blind people are using,
Yeah,
get comfortable with that.
yeah, yeah.
So I think that was a big thing. Are there any obstacles that you have faced as someone who has a Muslim background in a college education system while you're doing your undergrad?
So I thought college was actually very interesting. So I think because I was in the same school system from when I was in like preschool till high school, even though we did have that group of people that um, tried to make me feel less about myself just because I was a Muslim, I had a lot of non-Muslim friends, and I felt that this school was pretty well integrated. And what I've observed in the college setting is that college, unlike public school, because in public school you're kind of all forced together, like you all have like your assigned seating, or even if it's not assigned seating, like you all go to the same classes and you're with the same group of people day in and day out. Whereas in college, it's much easier to choose your specific friend groups. And I've been to a couple different universities now, and my observation on all campuses is that campuses are actually much more segregated than the public school system that I went to. Because when you go to college, now that you choose your own friends, you don't make friends with the people that you have classes with. You make friends with people that you socialize with outside of class. I think people automatically flock
You're
towards the
kind of running
people that
wild. Hmm.
they feel they share the most in common with. So when I walk into a college cafeteria, I think compared to at least my public school experience, I feel like, you have table where all like the Muslim kids are sitting, and you have a table where all the black kids are sitting, table where you might have like all your Korean kids sitting, and then so I thought college was actually interesting from a Muslim perspective, in that I thought it was great that I got to, for the first time, actually have like a lot of Muslim friends around me, going to school where I was going, just because the school system that I grew up in, there were no Muslims. But I thought it was also interesting from the perspective that
Mhm.
I think it became kind of an insular Muslim crowd, because I think so many people had been so deterred by facing harassment from other groups. So the Muslims ended up hanging out just with the Muslims. And I think part of that segregation, might be fueled from other places, but I think a lot of it is like internal as well. So we like
I
internally
think it
segregate
kind of
ourselves.
promotes that segregation in a well because you're so on your own and everybody's adults. They start getting more comfortable with others around them. Yeah, for sure. Syed, going forward, what do you expect in your law school journey at Harvard in terms of how your inner identities and your view on diversity intersect, and what would you like other students to
I'm actually
know as
really
they
excited about Harvard.
pursue
Harvard
their
seems to have a lot of really strong, similar to UT Austin, seems to have a lot of really strong student organizations that really represent my diverse characteristics. So Harvard has a very strong disability legal society, and then they also have a very strong Muslim legal society. So I'm already in contact with both, because they reached out to me during like admitted student weekend days, and I'm already connected with both organizations. I think they're going to be a great help with how to best overcome the arbitrary barriers that are placed upon me due to both those identities.
This is so exciting. Well, Syed, we appreciate you having here on this NABS podcast.
Oh yeah, sure.
And next, we're really excited to have with us Rilee Sloan. Thanks for being with us today, Rilee.
Yeah, of course. Would you like me to introduce myself real fast?
Of course.
Perfect. So my name is Rilee Sloan. I use he, him pronouns. I'm 20 and I go to Oklahoma City University. I'm a sophomore, rising junior actually now. And I serve as the chair of the Diversity and Inclusion Committee for NABS.
That's awesome. So the first thing I want to ask you is, why is diversity important to you?
Diversity is important to me because it's such an instrumental part of my life. It's something that I have to navigate very, very often as a queer person with a disability, and also from a working class background. And I'll probably emphasize this a lot during our chat today, but I talk a lot about intersectionality on the Diversity and Inclusion Committee. And the reason why is it's always been such a tricky concept for me to navigate, because I'd go into queer spaces where my disability was generally accepted, but there was still, some stigma towards the concept of disabilities in general. And ultimately, my queer peers couldn't understand, what I was going through as I was experiencing sight loss and relearning how to do everything as a blind person and gaining my blindness skills. But then on the flip side, I'd go to blindness organizations and they would not know how to interact with me as a queer person, especially as a trans person. And I'd get misgendered. I'd hear really offensive language, sometimes used intentionally, sometimes they weren't educated enough. But either way, it was hurtful, especially when they used it intentionally. And so when I'm navigating these spaces now, I can't help but think of the way in which it could be structured to accommodate, people from very diverse backgrounds. And so to me, diversity is important because it would have saved me a heck of a lot of trouble, but also it's important because it's the most proactive way to accommodate people based on their backgrounds and their cultures and their experiences, but also to create dialogue and discussion and to learn more about other cultures and identities.
That's awesome. So for those who don't know, can you just explain intersectionality a little bit?
Yeah, intersectionality is a term coined in the 1970s, and what it suggests is that everyone has several different identities, and some of these identities may be things that lead to oppression, and some maybe things that lead to privilege. But ultimately, everyone has a different set of identities, and these different identities intersect in a way that creates a really unique experience, and just like experience and life of experiences for people who identify with those, experiences in different areas of the world.
If you're comfortable, would you mind sharing a little bit about your experience with diversity personally?
Yeah, would you like to hear like a specific story or just in general?
Whatever you're comfortable sharing. I know you referenced it a little bit earlier, so if you want to expand upon that, feel free. If there's a specific instance that jumps out in your mind, you can share that as well. Just something kind of for our listeners to relate to a little bit. Because I know that diversity can become very abstract when we're talking about it, so I think some sort of anecdote might kind of tie it in together a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll just be more specific with, one or two examples of what I meant earlier from what I had referenced. I'll start with the positive, and if you want to hear a more negative one, I'll share that too. As far as like a more specific positive experience goes, I can cite the NFB was one of those first really positive experiences I had towards diversity. My first NFB meeting, my federation is, I'm transgender, and I started my transition when I was like 13, but I wasn't able to start my medical transition until I was 18. And it wasn't until then that I was perceived as a gender that actually transitioned, and my friends and my family referred to me properly. But had you heard my voice or just saw me on the street, like, you would have assumed that I identified as female just based on my biological characteristics. And now, of course, my voice is deep and I have facial hair, and it's great. Well, I can't really grow much facial hair, but I can grow a tiny bit now. And so, but my voice is deep. That's what matters. And but when I first got involved in the NFB, I was 16, and it was before I had started my medical transition. And so I had to be very assertive with my pronouns. It was something that I had to share pretty early on, and just hope to the heavens that whoever I was around could use my pronouns properly without continuously messing up and outing me, or respect me enough to use them, to put in the effort to use them. So I'd done so much research on the history of the NFB and Jacobus Tinbrook and the Federation's philosophy, and I was such a strong supporter of it. And I went into my first meeting knowing that it had to go perfect, that I had to be embraced, and that's exactly what happened in my first meeting. I went into the first meeting and I was scared, and I had like such a high little Mickey Mouse voice, and I was just trying to make it low. And I realized like pretty early on that it didn't matter. Like, it didn't matter if my voice was high or if it was low. Like, I came in and I very clearly identified myself as male, and that was immediately respected. Even in Oklahoma, the Federation was a community and we're a family. And so I was immediately embraced, not just for my identity as a blind person, but also for all of my identities, including my queer identity. At the time, I wasn't receiving very minimal support from my family. And my mom came in, and I shuddered. I was like, oh my gosh, I can never come back to the NFB because she misgendered me so hard. And I could tell she's doing it on purpose. Just really trying to dig in deep that and remind them all that they shouldn't be using male pronouns. And yet, you know what? They continued to use he, him pronouns. They never asked me about it. It was like it never happened. And this was years ago. And so every single time my queer identity has come up, it was treated as something that was appreciated and embraced, and something that was one of the many qualities that caused me to have, more unique perspective and be able to contribute dialogue and like discourse to my community, to the NFB. And also at different conventions and things like that, they would always try to get me connected to other federationists who shared my identities, mostly as a way to get me even more involved in the NFB and know that like, not only did they embrace me, but also there are other blind people and other federationists who shared my philosophy, but who also could understand a lot of my experiences as a queer person and a blind person.
Thank you for sharing that with us. I really think that there are going to be a lot of students out there who can relate. My last question for you is, what advice do you give to students who maybe feel uncomfortable talking about diversity or aren't sure how to approach diversity within their personal lives?
Anytime anyone asks me any question, I feel like my immediate response is education. But even in this, there's so much language that we don't use in our daily lives and the vernacular that we use when talking about diversity. I just casually threw out the term intersectionality, which I feel like is one of the most prominent terms that is used in conversations about diversity, but it's still important that I define it. And so there's so many other terms that the people, don't use in their daily lives. And so really it's empowering to be able to have an understanding of that language and use it in your own conversations and use it to educate others. There are a ton of free workshops online all about diversity, especially if you search for things geared towards a specific community. So if you search like diversity in the LGBTQ plus community, diversity among people of color, diversity in the Muslim community, things like that, you'll come up to some really specific results. And if you, follow up those searches with free training, you will find so many. So what I would do is I would spend whatever time you have looking over those trainings. YouTube is also a really fantastic resource. There are some great podcasts as well. If you're interested in learning more about the trans community, a really great one is You're So Brave. It's a podcast that specifically, talks a lot about like more intricate trans experiences, but it also talks a lot about diversity. So that's a good one. There are just so many. But I would listen to those podcasts, watch the YouTube videos, read up on some of the free trainings online, and just familiarize yourself with that language so that you can use it appropriately in your daily life and use it to educate yourself and others. And if you want even more of those trainings, the Diversity and Inclusion Committee, selfless promo, we just launched a task force to create a diversity and inclusion toolkit. So we have one really great diversity and inclusion curriculum that we created that will be on there. And then we're also gathering up other materials from other organizations and creating our own as we go along. So that'll be a really great resource. But to like very briefly summarize my answer, I'd say educate yourself on the more common terminology in these discussions so that you can empower yourself and others to like engage in productive discourse about different communities and different identities.
I want to thank you so much for being with us today. You broke it down and you made it very relatable and super easy for people to understand. And I know that diversity sometimes for people is more of an uncomfortable topic, but you're right. We need to learn to appreciate it and to make it celebrated and educate everyone on it, no matter your background. So I really appreciate you being here with us today.
Awesome. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm always just really excited to talk about diversity and inclusion, educate other NABSters.
Hi, my name is Johna Wright, and I am a proud NABS board member. I'm also the co-chair for our Diversity and Inclusion Committee. The National Association of Blind Students welcomes all opinions and identities without regard to race, ethnic background, age, sexual orientation, gender expression, or disability status. Therefore, the goal of the NABS Diversity and Inclusion Committee is to ensure that all calls, events, and other NABS programming is a safe space for all. However, we cannot do this without you. Committee leadership wants to hear from our membership, both prospective and current, so that we can fully understand and respond to your needs. To that effect, we have created some task forces to ensure that we can reach our goal. The first task force is collaboration. Members of this group will identify other divisions within the NFB as well as any external partners so that we can work with them on committee calls, events, and more. Next, we have the Diversity and Inclusion Toolkit Task Force, which is focused on developing and compiling a toolkit of diversity and inclusion best practices and guidelines for future leadership of NABS. Lastly, there is the Production Task Force, which handles everything related to our committee call and event logistics and planning. If you've always wanted to get involved, you have expertise or unique perspectives in one or more of these areas, or you have a passion for diversity and inclusion, we invite you to join one or all of these task forces. Email me at jonawright98@gmail.com. That's JOHNA WRIGHT98@gmail.com to sign up or for questions. Thanks for listening, everyone. Now back to the NABS Now podcast.
Today we have Adriana Banos and Jessica Karim joining us to talk about their experiences with diversity. So Adriana.
So hello, my name is Adriana Banos. I am from Edinburgh, Texas, and I am of Hispanic origin. My family is from Chiapas, Mexico, which borders Guatemala.
Hi, I'm Jessica. I'm a sophomore. I'm a social work major. I'm from New York. I'm Guyanese, so my parents originated from Guyana. It's a very small town in a country in South America.
Great. So the first question I want to ask you guys is, why is diversity important to you?
So diversity is very, very important because you not just only learn different things from other people, but it definitely promotes, I feel, in a certain way, peace among people.
I think that for me, it's important because I think that we need all these different perspectives as a society. We are so multifaceted and we are so versatile that there is no one race, there is no one class. And I think that for us, it is valuable to gain those perspectives and hear those new ideas and just learn more about people that you really didn't know before.
I agree. So Adriana, we'll start with you. If you're comfortable, would you be willing to share a little bit about your experiences with diversity as you've come to know it?
So like I mentioned before, my family is from Chiapas, Mexico. So of course, here in the Rio Grande Valley where I live, the vast majority is Mexican. But when I do travel up north, everybody tends to be a little bit more rejectful, right, toward Mexicans. But my experience personally is mainly inclusive. A lot of people have included me as a blind Mexican, and I'm very, very happy about that. And I have also been able to learn about other cultures too. And that I feel is very, very important because it builds our society.
So for me, I think my experience with diversity, it's definitely been an interesting one. I live in the Bronx in New York, so definitely a very kind of diverse neighborhood. And the school I went to was kind of, I would say, more of an inner city school, so it had a really nice, diverse mix of ethnic groups. And then when I was going to college and when I was applying, I wasn't really sure where I wanted to go, but I wanted it to be private. I wanted it to be smaller. And I ended up going to Adelphi University, which is where I am now, which is in Long Island, Garden City, Long Island. And it was a bit of a culture shock for me, just going from somewhere where all my friends were at the same economic advantage or disadvantage that I was at to, people have cars of their own and it's very predominantly white, which for me as someone who isn't white was just a little jarring to realize. And it's not that people were mean or people were hostile, but I don't think I was very aware of where I was from until I went on campus. Specifically, I remember the first time I went home. I stayed on campus for a few weeks. I think it was at a certain point in freshman year, because normally I would go home every weekend, but at this point I was like, let me stay over. And it's just different. You notice all the things. And I would come home, and from Long Island to where I live in the Bronx, you have to cross a bridge. And I would cross the bridge and I would just feel this sense of wow, we are different. And then you look at my parents, who I love dearly, but I'm first generation, so they never were able to get a college education. They were never able to get that degree and kind of make more of themselves, which isn't their fault. But then, you look at my friends of mine who are very, very well-to-do, and it's just the contrast for me was just kind of surprising. I don't think I'd really thought about my race and class identity until I was in a situation where the majority of people weren't like me.
So as we are the next generations of leaders and professionals, what do you guys think we can do to acknowledge and value diversity?
I think as time is passing, people are a little bit more open-minded than they were before, because before, I know that throughout the history, there has been a lot of shock, a lot of attacks toward other people and cultures. And so this generation, it feels a little bit more open-minded. So I feel that what professionals can do now is, one, keep on the pathway that they are now, which is definitely recognizing other people and their backgrounds, right? And so I feel like in certain ways, depending on the aspect of where they're working, they can look for ways to learn other languages, maybe even look for translators and interpreters to get to those other people in the environment where they're at.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that point. I feel like as the years have moved on, we have become a lot more open-minded. And I think that is what we should continue to do. It's just being open-minded to others' perspectives, to where other people come from. Because for me, I feel like I don't know a lot about other cultures, but I want to learn. So I always try to ask and just kind of think about that whenever I meet someone. It's interesting. My friend and I were going to Sobol, which is like this like acai juice bowl place with like fruit and granola. It's very healthy and it's quite good. But we were going and I was kind of joking. We were in the car and I was like, they would never make one of these where I'm from. And she was like, what do you mean? I'm like, well, they cater to their demographic. Up in Garden City, it's assumed that a lot of people have more money. So the places are more high end, they're more upscale. But where I live, it's definitely a lower economic area. So people just don't cater to that. And then I think that really surprised her, which is interesting to me because I feel like for me, being the minority group, I think about it a lot more than the people that are in the majority group, which is where I go to school, predominantly white and upper class. And then once I point it out, they're like, wow, there really is a difference. So I guess just using that to illustrate my point, just being open and aware, because you don't really think about these things or these topics until you're in that situation.
Personally, I've experienced this, but have you all both at some point in your life noticed that possessing that identity of yours intersect with blindness? How does that play in your day-to-day life? Because personally, my parents are 100% Korean, but I've migrated to the United States when I was 11. So I've noticed, as from an immigrant perspective, have seen that from time to time, it's really hard to find a 1.5 that kind of is in between phase where, your parents are typically from the country of origin, but you are technically residing in the US, happen to have blindness or other disability, and how that both play a role in your identity.
I love that.
That
oh
is,
my God, I love that. That is amazing. We should talk more because that is so true.
It is. So definitely, I'm a junior in high school. I'm going to become a senior next year, and I'm already considering my options for college. So it definitely is a huge barrier, because with my family, they are very, I guess you could say, overprotective. They cannot adjust to the idea that I actually want to become more independent and live my life to the fullest and as normal as I possibly can. It's, for them, it'll even get to the point where they're trying different ways and very indirectly. They approach things very indirectly. So they throw indirect lines at me, trying to manipulate my decisions. So it definitely is, because a big misconception, we don't think for ourselves, that people make our decisions for us. And so I feel like they very indirectly try to do that, to make my decisions for me. So it's a constant battle for me on a daily basis to establish myself as an adult.
Wow. Oh my goodness. I have so much to say. Yes to all of that, Adriana. I completely agree. I think that for me, just being someone who is the oldest child, the daughter, and comes from like this Caribbean household, we're not really taught to question things. It's kind of like, what your parents say is the de facto rule and you can't deviate from that. But I remember when I was picking college, I'm a junior in college, or I'll be a junior in fall. I remember I was talking to my mom and I was like, listen, I need to go somewhere where I know no one and where no one knows me, because I want to establish my own identity. And then, it's been weird, but it's also been liberating in a sense. And that's one of the things that quarantine has kind of taken from me. I miss that freedom of just being able to get in a friend's car and go somewhere without having to validate myself. Because like Adriana said, parents are really overprotective, especially if you're first generation and especially if you're not from here. And it was just me constantly having to be like, I'm fine. But there was something, I remember the first time ever I got in a friend's car and we like drove to get cheesecake. I'm like, I feel like this is what quote unquote normal teenagers do, because I feel like I'm able to be someone that has friends and has those opportunities. And I think that if I had communicated that's an experience I wouldn't have gotten before. And then for me, as someone that's Caribbean, there is this huge emphasis on grades, like huge emphasis on grades. And I'm pretty intelligent, but college obviously is so much more different than high school. And I just remember like last semester, fall of 2019, I took 18 credits, and I just remember I took this class. It was like this online formatted class, and it was hard because I had 5 other in-person classes. By the end of the week, I just wouldn't get around to it. And I just remember like kind of skipping a couple of the assignments, and I didn't do well on like the middle test we took. And I just remember I'm really bad with facial expressions. So I called my parents and I lost it. I like burst into tears, because for me, as someone that's Caribbean, we don't talk about our feelings. Like my parents don't ask me, how are you? How do you feel? What's going on with you? And then there's this whole emotional dividend where it's like, okay, how do I even begin to open up to them about everything, whether that's blindness or grades? So I just felt like I couldn't tell them anything. So for me in that moment, all that emotion and anxiety and stress I had been feeling let out in a way. And they were like, wow, this is hard for her. And I think that's hard for them to accept because they aren't from here. So for them, blindness is something that they're not really used to aside from me. And again, I'm pretty intelligent. So when I'm not okay, it's weird because it's like, they don't know how to acknowledge that I'm not okay because we've never had that foundation before. But they also don't know how to acknowledge where I'm coming from because they just don't understand.
Thank you all so
question.
much.
That was really good. Like, that was great.
Because I feel like I empathize with a lot of that, especially since I'm
I
kind of in
empathize with a
between.
lot of that.
I think there's a certain expectation to be held, and especially when you have foreign parents that.
And then when you don't meet that, there's just like, oh my God, like how do I come to them? How do I come to them and tell them not doing okay?
Exactly.
I also just think like when people immigrate to this country or maybe like had a harder time growing up, especially whether it be economically or some of them were even like persecuted and stuff like that, I think that like there wasn't really time or resources to focus on the emotional stuff sometimes. And so I think sometimes the expectations are so that they don't want their kids to go through what they went through.
It's definitely weird though, because it's like I don't think they purposefully mean to not open up, but for me it's like I don't even know, like we've never done it. You know, my mother and I, we don't order pizza and eat ice cream and watch like Gilmore Girls together. We're not like that. So for me to even begin to like have a conversation with her, like, hey, I'm 20 now, like let's talk about dating, like just something trivial like that, like I don't even know where to begin to start with opening up, because when there's no foundation, you know, how do you build off of that? You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I get that.
And then sometimes the fear of them seeing you as, because I know in my personal case, if we even feel any type of sadness, any type of depression, we try to come to my mom, you're stupid, why are you feeling like that, quit that, you know,
what's wrong with you? Yes.
Yeah, what you, there's something wrong with you. They even like go as far to like, are you genetically incorrect or something? Because they don't.
I think it's just because mental health is so stigmatized, at least where I'm from. It's like, oh, you just suck it up and move on. But I'm like, I don't think I can.
That's how I've been perceived to do, as, you know, it's okay, it's fine, just go on with your day, things are gonna be okay.
Yeah. So you're not able to talk to them, so you're like, I don't know how to tell them, like, I might not be doing okay.
Yeah.
Like, it's so weird.
I think it'll add a lot to this.
Hello listeners, it's Seyoon again. I'm incredibly excited to have this time to share a little bit about myself, and at the end I want us to discuss a little bit of what's happening in light of the killing of George Floyd. I want us to rewind our time to May of 2012 when I immigrated to the United States. Born and raised in South Korea for about 11 years, until my parents made an executive decision to come to America, not only due to the low expectations set for the blind people, but the lack of support, the education system, and for achieving higher dreams. With that said, immigration was not easy. When I stepped on American soil for the first time, I was nervous. I did not speak as fluent of an English. My degenerative eye condition meant that I still had ample amount of vision to travel without a use of a white cane. I still used large print, and psychologically I was continuing to tell myself that I have enough vision to accomplish what I need to accomplish. With those mindsets, I attended a public elementary school for a little while, a middle school, and a high school. During those times, I was taught to use a white cane, learn to use Braille, and learn English, tackle mainstream curriculum courses like every other students. At first, I continued to deny my blindness like I used to be back in Seoul. I told myself that I won't need to use a cane. I still have enough vision to do this. It was very much a gray area. Even though I knew that my vision was going to deteriorate over time, I continued to tell myself that I could see and don't need to learn blindness skills. But it was apparent that when I began to attend high school, my vision was quickly degenerating, and I did not look back at the decisions that I've made in middle school that led me to where I am. Such skills include using a white cane, obviously, learning grade 1 and grade 2 Braille, and ultimately opening myself up by accepting blindness and being proud of my blindness. This allowed me to join athletic teams such as cross country, be in a performing ensemble group such as marching band, get involved with community organizations such as the Blues Blind Hockey Team, Achilles International chapter within my local area. But what I want to talk about is diversity in particular. Diversity means so much to me as an immigrant, as a 1.5 generation Asian American male. Blindness aside, I knew that I was different than others. However, I should be happy and accept that I am different because everyone else is different. There is no such thing as normal. We all possess different characteristics and different intersectionality, as Rilee said. I think that's what's so unique about the individuality, more than ever. And as an immigrant, to me, I continue to promote my Asian American heritage by following customs and cultures that I was taught, but striving myself to teach others and celebrate diversity, not only amongst Korean Americans, Asian Americans in the broader context, but for other communities. To me, being an immigrant may have been challenging at first, but later noticed that you are really like everybody else. As a college student, it just reminded me of the importance of diversity and the fact that all are welcome, regardless of your background, your race, your gender, and your disability status. With that in mind, I want us to turn to what has happened not too long ago, an incident that happened in Minneapolis. A video of a black man, an innocent, unarmed black man, suffocating, begging for his breath, begging for his life, while brutally being pinned down by a white police officer for an entire 8 minutes. He was begging for his breath. He was begging for his life. The National Federation of the Blind released the following statement. As a civil rights organization with diverse membership, we strive to grow in our understanding of conditions that affect us. Throughout our history, we have participated in civil disobedience and honor the value that it holds to bring about social change. We are firmly committed to enacting our social diversity statement, which in part expresses we recognize that our views and convictions will be challenged, and we expect this challenge to take place in a climate of tolerance and mutual respect in order to maintain a united organization, recognizing that this is a time of intense grief, a time of learning, and a time of reflection. We stand with our members who are in pain and pray not only that for peace, but for justice. We stand in solidarity with our Black members and publicly commit to do anti-racist work within our organization. And that statement was released by President Mark Riccobono. I feel this is a time that we come together more than ever. There is no politics to racism. There is no politics to sexism. And I feel it's time for a change. And I felt that this message had to be shared. I felt that it was appropriately time for this message to be shared in this podcast as we discussed diversity and celebrating diversity, celebrating intersectionality. Thanks for listening. Thanks for listening to this episode of NABS Now Podcast. Visit us on the web at nabslink.org, which is NABSLINK.org. Check us out on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and we will catch you on the very next episode.